My son-in-law looked me in the eye at my own birthday dinner and told me I was being selfish. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't set down my fork. I picked up my phone, walked outside into the cold, and made one call. 48 hours later, he was standing at my front door with tears running down his face. Let me tell you how we got there. My name is Robert. I turned 70 this past November. I spent 31 years building a commercial real estate company from a single office in Columbus, Ohio, into something that employed over 200 people. I sold it 6 years ago for more money than I ever imagined a kid from a working-class neighborhood in Cleveland would see in 3 lifetimes. I didn't do it to be rich. I did it because I believed that if you worked hard enough, long enough, and with enough honesty, the world would eventually meet you halfway. My wife, Carol, believed the same thing. We built everything together. She handled the books for the first 12 years, back when we couldn't afford a real accountant. She raised our 2 children while I traveled. She never complained. Not once. Not in the way that leaves a mark. When she got sick, I stepped back from the company entirely. I sat beside her for 19 months. She passed 4 years ago this spring. I still set 2 cups out for coffee every morning. I don't know when that habit will stop. I'm not sure I want it to. Our daughter, Emily, was 34 when her mother died. She handled the grief the way Emily handles most things, practically, quietly, and mostly alone. Our son Marcus was 31. He flew in from Portland, stayed 2 weeks, cried with me in the kitchen, and then went back to his life. Both of them had good lives. I was proud of them for that. Emily met my son-in-law, Daniel, about 18 months after Carol passed. She brought him to Thanksgiving. He was 38, tall, well-dressed, worked in finance, and had the kind of smile that arrives a half second before the sincerity does. I noticed that. I filed it away, the way you file things when you're hoping you're wrong. I wasn't wrong, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Daniel proposed to Emily 14 months after they started dating. She called me first, before she called her brother, and that mattered to me. I told her I was happy if she was happy. I told her I just wanted to meet him properly, sit down with him, man to man, before we started talking about weddings. She said, of course. She set up a dinner at a restaurant in Columbus. Daniel shook my hand firmly, called me sir, and spent most of the evening asking me about the real estate market. At the time, I thought he was nervous. Now I understand he was calculating. The wedding was held the following September. I paid for most of it, not because Daniel's family couldn't contribute. They could. His father had done well in insurance. But because Daniel and Emily had come to me 8 months before and explained that it would be, quote, so much simpler if everything ran through one account. I agreed. I wrote the checks. The venue in Nantucket, the catering, the flowers, the photographers, the hotel block for out-of-town guests, just over $90,000 by the time everything cleared. I didn't mention it at the rehearsal dinner. I didn't mention it at the rehearsal dinner. I didn't mention it at the wedding. It was a gift. That's what parents do, or at least that's what I believed. Daniel's parents attended. His father, Gerald, spent the rehearsal dinner telling me about his lake house. His mother spent it telling me how beautiful the flowers were, as if she hadn't seen the receipts, which she hadn't because she hadn't paid for any of it. Nobody said thank you directly. I told myself that was fine. People get swept up in weddings. I'd been to enough of them to know. After the wedding, Emily and Daniel moved into a townhouse in Brookline. Daniel had gotten a position at a firm in Boston. Emily was already working remotely for a tech company, so the move made sense for them. I flew out twice that first year. The visits were warm but brief. Daniel always had somewhere to be. The first real signal came about 16 months into their marriage. Emily called me on a Tuesday evening. She sounded a little careful, the way she gets when she's delivering news she's not entirely comfortable with. She told me Daniel had been thinking, and that they'd been talking, and that they felt it might make more sense for them to, and I'm paraphrasing here, have more financial stability as a couple. I asked her what she meant by that. She said Daniel felt that carrying 2 mortgages, meaning their townhouse and the property taxes and upkeep on my beach house in Chatham, was a strain on the family's resources. I told her gently that they didn't carry any of the Chatham house. That was mine. I paid for it. Carol and I had bought it together in 2003. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Daniel thought it might be worth discussing what would happen to the house eventually, and whether it made sense to, and this is the phrase that I still hear clearly, restructure things sooner rather than later. I told her I would think about it. I did think about it. For about 3 minutes. Then I called Marcus. Marcus listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Dad, that's not a conversation about the future. That's a land grab." He didn't say it with anger. He said it the way someone states something they've already understood for a while. I appreciated that. I told him I wasn't ready to call it that yet. He said, "Fine." He said, "Just keep your eyes open." I kept my eyes open. Over the following year, the requests came in different shapes. Daniel mentioned at a family dinner in Boston that the Chatham house sat empty most of the year, and that was a shame. He mentioned, on a phone call where I could hear the calculation behind every word, that property values in that area were climbing, and it might be smart to act before the market shifted. He mentioned, through Emily, that they had spoken to a financial advisor who suggested that transferring certain assets within the family now, rather than through an estate, could save significant money on taxes. Each time I listened, I was polite. I said I would consider it. I changed nothing. What I did do, quietly, was make an appointment with my own attorney. His name is Paul. I've known him for 22 years. I walked into his office in Columbus on a Wednesday morning in March, and I told him everything. Paul is not a man who startles easily. He listened, asked 3 or 4 precise questions, and then leaned back and said, "Robert, I want to update a few things in your estate documents. Not because anything is wrong, but because clarity is kindness, and right now there are some parties who are benefiting from ambiguity." We spent 2 hours in that office. I left feeling the way you feel after a medical checkup, where nothing is wrong but you're glad you went. I told no one about that meeting. My 70th birthday fell on a Saturday. Emily had suggested we celebrate at the Chatham house. She said she wanted to bring in a caterer, invite family and a few close friends, make it a proper occasion. I said yes. I flew Marcus in from Portland. My sister, Diane, drove up from New Jersey. A handful of old friends, people who had known Carol, people I'd worked with for decades, made the trip. There were about 22 people in that house the evening of my birthday. The caterer did a beautiful job. The food was good. The wine was good. People told stories about Carol that made me laugh and made me cry in the way that doesn't embarrass you in front of people who loved her too. Marcus gave a toast that was honest and funny and kind. Diane cried through most of it. I was happy that evening. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely simply happy. Daniel had been quiet most of the night. Not unfriendly, just present in that surface-level way he had. He refilled glasses. He chatted with Gerald, who had come up from Connecticut. He stood at the edge of conversations with the look of a man who was waiting for something. After the cake, after the candles, after people had drifted into smaller conversations around the living room and out onto the deck, Daniel appeared at my elbow. He said he wanted a word. I thought he was going to say something about the evening, something normal, something a son-in-law says to his father-in-law on a milestone birthday. Instead, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and he placed a folder in front of me. I looked at the folder. I looked at him. He said he and Emily had been working with their attorney and their financial advisor, and they felt that this was actually the ideal moment to move forward on the Chatham property. He said the documents inside were a gift deed, already prepared. He said all I needed to do was sign, and we could handle the notary the following week. I sat with that for a moment. I asked him where Emily was. He said she agreed with him. He said this was something they'd discussed at length. I asked him why. If this was a family conversation, Emily wasn't sitting at the table. He said she was talking with Diane and didn't want to disrupt the evening. I looked at the folder. I did not open it. I said, very quietly, that I appreciated the thought, that I understood they had put effort into preparing this, and that I was not going to sign anything tonight. He leaned forward. His voice dropped, but it didn't soften. He said that I needed to understand something. He said that they were planning for the future. He said that the house would come to Emily eventually anyway, and that waiting only created complications. He said, and this is the part that I replay more than the rest, that I was being selfish. That word in that house, on that evening, with Carol's photo still on the shelf in the hallway, with Marcus in the next room, with 20 years of mortgage payments and property taxes, and every summer Carol and I had spent on that deck watching the water. That word. I did not raise my voice. I said, I think we're done talking for tonight, Daniel. He pushed the folder toward me. I stood up, picked up my phone, and walked outside. The deck was empty. The ocean was dark. I could hear voices from inside the house, laughter, the sound of Diane telling a story that involved her gesturing with a wine glass. I called Paul. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what had just happened. He asked me 2 questions. Then he told me to enjoy the rest of my birthday, go to sleep, and come to his office Monday morning. I went back inside. I found Emily in the sunroom with Diane. She looked at me and I could see in her eyes that she knew or suspected or had been waiting to see how things went. I kissed her on the cheek. I thanked Diane for coming. I went back to the party and I was present for the rest of it. Daniel did not come to say goodbye when the guests left. I drove Marcus to his hotel that night. He sat in the passenger seat and he said, "What happened in the kitchen?" I told him. He was quiet for about a mile. Then he said, "What are you going to do?" I told him I had a plan. He looked at me and nodded once. He said, "Good." Monday morning, I walked into Paul's office at 9. He had already drafted 3 documents. The first was an updated will, significantly restructured, that removed certain assumptions about property distribution and added specific language about what conditions, if any, would trigger early transfer of assets. The second was a property trust for the Chatham House, naming Marcus and a charitable foundation as co-beneficiaries, with a provision that the property could not be transferred to any individual who had applied pressure, direct or indirect, for its early transfer. The third was a letter, not a legal document, just a letter, addressed to Emily, that outlined clearly and without anger everything that had happened and everything I now knew. I signed the first 2 documents. I took the third home and I sat with it for 24 hours. I also, that same Monday morning, made a second call to a firm I had used once before when I had concerns about a business partner's financial dealings. The man I spoke to was named Warren. I told him what I wanted. He said he'd have something within a week. He had something within 4 days. I won't go into all of it, but I will say that Daniel's presentation of himself as a careful, patient family man with purely logistical concerns about estate planning was not entirely consistent with his actual behavior. Warren provided documentation of a separate account, opened 18 months into the marriage, that Daniel had not disclosed to Emily. He provided records of communication with a woman in Chicago that were not ambiguous. He provided a record of a loan Daniel had taken against their joint investment account without Emily's signature, which was, as Paul later confirmed, legally significant. I sat in my kitchen in Columbus on a Thursday evening with a folder of my own in front of me. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about Carol. I thought about what she would say. I knew what she would say. She would say that Emily deserved to know. She would say that protecting someone from pain was not the same as protecting them. She would say that the truth, given with love, is still a gift, even when it doesn't feel like one. I called Emily on Friday morning. I asked her to come to Columbus. Just her, not Daniel. I told her I had something important to share and that I preferred to do it in person. She heard something in my voice. She asked if everything was okay. I said it would be. She drove down Saturday. She sat at the same kitchen table where Daniel had placed his folder 2 weeks earlier. I placed mine in front of her. I sat across from her, the way he had sat across from me, but I reached across and I put my hand over hers first. I told her I loved her. I told her nothing I was about to show her changed that. I opened the folder. She didn't cry right away. She went through the documents carefully, the way she does, the practical, quiet way that is so much like her mother. She read everything. She turned pages slowly. When she got to the communication records, she stopped. She put them face down on the table. Then she cried. I let her. I got her a glass of water. I sat with her. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't tell her what to feel. I just stayed. After a while, she asked me why I hadn't told her sooner. I told her I hadn't known sooner. I told her I hadn't gone looking until the night of my birthday, when he pushed a folder across a table and called me selfish in Carol's house. She looked up at me. I said, "No one gets to call me selfish in your mother's house, not for refusing to sign over the thing your mother and I built together." She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she said, "He's been planning this for a while, hasn't he?" I said, "I believe so." Yes. She drove back to Boston that evening. I don't know exactly what happened in that house over the next 48 hours. Emily hasn't given me the full account, and I haven't pressed her for it. What I know is what happened Sunday evening, which was that my doorbell rang at a few minutes past 7. And when I opened the door, Daniel was standing on my front step. He was not the man from my birthday kitchen. He was not composed. He was not strategic. He was not holding a folder. He looked like someone who had not slept and had spent the day trying to find a way through a situation that did not have a comfortable exit. His eyes were red. I stood in the doorway. I didn't invite him in. I waited. He started with justifications. He said it wasn't what it looked like. He said the account was for a specific purpose. He said the Chicago situation was over. He said he had been under enormous pressure. He said that everything he had done regarding the house was because he was trying to build something for Emily, for their future, for their family. I listened to all of it. When he stopped, I said, "Daniel, I don't want your explanations, and I'm not the right person to decide your future with my daughter. That's between you and Emily." I paused. "But I want you to understand something clearly. The house is not, and will not be, available to you. My estate is structured accordingly. Those decisions are final." I paused again. "And you should know that my attorney has copies of everything Warren put together. So does Emily. So does Marcus. So does Paul's firm in escrow." He stood there, the composure he'd been holding together since I opened the door, let go completely. His face crumpled. He put one hand on the door frame. He said quietly that he had made terrible mistakes. I said, "Yes, you did." I said goodnight. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Carol's photo was there on the shelf, the one from the summer of 2007. Chatham. The deck, her laughing at something off camera. I looked at it. Then I went to the kitchen and I made 2 cups of coffee the way I always do. I set one on Carol's side of the table. I set one on Carol's side of the table. I sat down with mine. Emily and Daniel separated 3 weeks later. She called me the night it became official, and she was sad, but she was steady. She is her mother's daughter in that way. She told me she was going to be okay. I told her I knew she was. Marcus came for Christmas. He and Emily and I sat around that same kitchen table and we ate and we talked and we laughed about things that had nothing to do with any of this. At one point, Diane called in on video and stayed on the phone for an hour and a half talking about nothing in particular, which is its own kind of gift. I still own the house in Chatham. This past July, I drove up alone and spent a week there. I sat on the deck in the evenings and watched the water and drank my coffee and let the quiet be quiet. I have been asked, since all of this, whether I feel guilty, whether I should have handled things differently, whether pushing back the way I did caused damage that might have been avoided. I think about that question honestly. What I know is this: Carol and I didn't build what we built so that someone could walk into a room on a birthday and slide a folder across a table. We built it slowly, together, with 30 years of early mornings and late nights, and every sacrifice you make when you decide that what you're building matters. That is not mine to give away, because someone calculated that the path of least resistance runs through my living room. The Chatham house will go, eventually, to Emily and Marcus. That was always the plan. The plan never changed. Only the timeline someone else was trying to impose on it changed. And that timeline was not made in good faith. I am 70 years old. I have buried my wife. I have run a company. I have sat at bedsides and in boardrooms and in courtrooms as a witness. And I know what a man looks like when he is working an angle versus when he is genuinely asking for something. Daniel was working an angle. I simply declined to be the table he worked it on. And if that makes me selfish, I can live with that word. I've lived with harder things,